Hi, I'm Niel Hiscox, publisher of Canadian Auto Dealer Magazine, and I'm here this morning with Chuck Seguin, president of Seguin Advisory Services. Chuck has been a longtime contributor to Canadian Auto Dealer. In fact, he's been in every single issue of Canadian Auto Dealer for the past 12 years. And has really emerged over that period of time as one of the most important consultants and experts, particularly in the area of the retail side of the industry. So, Chuck, this is something you and I have talked about doing for years, probably with higher production values, but working remotely is a catalyst to get things done a different way. So I'm hoping this will be the first of a regular series of chats we're going to undertake. Welcome to Canadian Auto Dealer Video.
Thanks, Neil. I'm looking forward to making some contributions over the next little while.
So for this first one, let's dive in. We are from a business impact standpoint, we're 2-3 weeks into the virus and the impact it's having on the business community, the impact it's having on dealers. You and I talked earlier this week, and you mentioned you're getting a ton of phone calls from dealers. Give me a bit of a window into the things they are most eager to discuss. What's the most urgent topics that they want addressed?
Well, clearly they're concerned about keeping their businesses open and how to do that. But first and foremost, it's the health and safety of their employees and their customers, and trying to do the right thing. That's been a lot of the discussion, a bit of an emotional, I think we should do this, but does it make sense? That sort of thing. So these are uncharted waters. There's no playbook for a pandemic on how do you operate, and each dealer has a slightly different approach. But in general, they want to try and stay open as long as it's economically feasible for them to do so. And there does become a volume issue. The first week or so, it wasn't that significant. Now it's getting very significant. A lot of dealers have closed. They've closed their showrooms, their service businesses. Some of them are still being fairly robust. Others, it's beginning to trickle, and we're now getting to the point where they're making some real decisions whether they're going to open next week or not, and how are they going to handle their people from a payroll standpoint. Many of them have already issued temporary layoff orders to parts of their organization. Those will likely expand. There's a lot of questions still around the 75% wage subsidy announced by the federal government, and the rules on that are sort of coming out a little bit day by day. But there does seem to be quite an appetite to take advantage of that. So a lot of discussions, and then how do I manage my cash flows? What do I do? What am I looking for? What are some of the expenses I can maybe take a look at, and things like that. So they're definitely thinking front end at this point, and I would expect in the next week or two the conversations will begin to develop into what's coming out the other side look like. Am I going to be able to operate my dealership in full scale? Or are we going to be ramping up slowly, and how do I plan around that? This is very complicated. There's people's lives, employees' lives involved, and there's an awful lot of good thinking that's going on out there.
Let's talk a little bit about some of those big expense categories, because obviously there's no question there's going to be a revenue crunch. There's some bills that need to keep getting paid. There's some, you mentioned the 75%, we can talk about that look like they're going to get some support. I think there's some areas where significant vendors to dealers in the market are stepping up with the ability to either defer or in some cases waive some expenses. But talk a little bit about some of those big expense categories and the options dealers do have.
Well, what I tell them, because some of them are structured differently, I tell them to go down to the bare nuts, and what is going to what expenses are you going to incur if you have absolutely zero operations? So try to identify those, and then add incrementally those elective expenses that you believe you need to operate your website, do your online sales, all of those sort of things. The other is to identify the additional pandemic type expenses that they're receiving, that they're incurring. So things like the setting up the hand sanitizers, the extra time it takes now for social distancing, how many people can they actually put through their service bay? How are they going to stagger appointments? How are they going to do all of these things to respect the health and safety of employees and customers? And that really means slowing things down in a lot of ways. So, really taking a look at what's my net, what am I going to incur regardless of whether I'm open or not, and then add back those things that you think are perhaps critical or may help you during this period of time, and then look at the additional expenses and the impact of doing business differently during a pandemic than normally.
It's interesting. This is, in some ways, one's tempted to think back to 2008, 2009, but it's really fundamentally a completely different thing. In 08, 09, from a dealer standpoint, there was a tremendous liquidity crunch, and a business that's absolutely dependent on being able to access capital couldn't access capital. Now we have certainly the government is putting a lot of things in place to try to keep access to capital going, but what we're going to see is really a complete suspension of the demand side of the business.
Yeah, as we move more towards, I'll call it lockdown for lack of a better term, there seems to be a very strong initiative with the health advisors across this country to get people to stay home, to not socialize, to not go out, not drive along. And I think we're going to get some amendments, at least in Ontario today, to what is considered to be an essential business, and that list is going to get shorter. So in the short term, the demand for transportation is going to really drop down, and I would expect that the demand for vehicle servicing is also going to do that, except for emergency response vehicles and essential vehicles and things like that. So we're going into another ratcheting down phase starting next week probably, and that's going to get much closer to our not open state that we have to manage through. And then the discussion really begins to think about how long is that going to last. The government has put some money in place to maintain the employment levels in some way, shape, or form. But we're still unsure as to what the ramp up is going to be. We know that virtually all car companies have stopped production. So what's going to be the backlog of new vehicles coming in potentially? When's that going to happen? What's the transportation system going to look like? What's going to happen at the ports? What are the new rules that we're going to be living under going forward? Because it's not going to be the same old thing. This isn't going to end at 4:00 on a Friday afternoon and we go back to normal on Saturday. This is going to take months, if not longer, to define a new normal, to build trust in each other again, to build trust in going out to businesses. Right now, what people are being asked to do, if you happen to go out and do some grocery shopping, you wipe down all of your groceries, and when you get home, you strip off all your clothes. Like there is a whole bunch of extra procedures going on now, and some of those are going to stick. Some of those will become part of our normal fabric. I have no idea what those are at this point, but we will be different going forward. And how does that translate into the way that we're going to operate our business going forward?
Yeah, for an industry that already has a challenge trying to figure out the ideal way to deliver a vehicle to a customer, and there's all kinds of different schools of thought on how you do that. When you now have to add in, are there along with certified pre-owned, are there certified sanitized? And then does that become a whole other thing? So, I think as we go forward, there's going to be an awful lot of very interesting things to take a look at. And I'm really looking forward to this being sort of the first of a number of chats. So let's wind it up there for now. And I think what we'll do, we'll come back next week. I'd love to be able to say, this is what we're going to be talking about next week. We have such a fast moving situation. I think we're going to have to call it at the time and see. But I think part of that discussion, as you mentioned, is going to be very much, how viable does it continue to be open, and under what circumstances, as we are in a community that's continuing to tighten.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what develops in the hours and days to come, because things are changing rapidly. But certainly I look forward to another discussion next week.
All right. Thanks, Chuck. I appreciate it. Signing off for Canadian Auto Dealer.